Okay, today's story is about a big hound dog. It's a true story. We're going to call the hound dog Hoover because I don't know what the dog's real name was, but it was because he would take and clean up everything just like a vacuum cleaner. His big old tail would start to wag and his whole body would start to wag, and he had these big floppy ears, and he lived on a farm which was just west and south of Chapel, Nebraska. It's a true story. Well, in this particular farm lived a farmer that had a old pickup truck, and it had a bad muffler. And a bad muffler in a pickup truck would make a very loud sound. And so as soon as Hoover knew that this was going to happen, he heard this noise, and he would run, not toward the pickup truck, but toward the edge of the road where it went to the county road. Because he knew at the end of the farm, the farmer had to slow down, and when he had to slow down, that was his opportunity to jump into the back of the pickup. And he loved to be in the back of the pickup. He liked to have his ears blown in the wind. As a matter of fact, he'd take his paws and stick them up on top of the cab where the old farmer sat. And so they went to the general store / gas station. It would be very similar today to going to maybe a QT or something like that. But then that was a gathering place and people would talk and things like that. But inside there was a big counter. The counter was glass, and inside the counter was all the junk food. And so old Hoover, he would jump out of the car or out of the back of the pickup truck, and he would start whining by the door, which I guess from dog talk that would be, hey, please let me in. And then he would go and sit in front of the counter. What he really wanted, more than anything else, were these powdered donuts. And the size they had didn't have the extra 33%, so it would have been about 6 of them. And so there were 6 donuts inside there. And the farmer would do all kinds of things. He'd plop an extra quarter or something down when he was finished with his gas, and he'd buy him a package of donuts. And some of the things that he would do is he would take the donuts and he would toss them up in the air. And when he did, Hoover made sure they never hit the ground because he was always underneath trying to get it, and his big old tail would wag along with his body, and sometimes he would hit things, but he would run around and he would catch the donuts. They never seemed to hit the floor. Another thing the farmer liked to do was this. He would take the donuts and he would lay them out on the floor, just like I'm going to do it right here. And he would put them there, and he would look and he'd say, Hoover, don't eat those donuts. And the farmer would say, you know what? You can eat that one now. And then Hoover would go over and he would eat the donut. In the meantime, he would never eat the donut. And then a little while later he'd say, Hoover, you can have that one. And he'd eat that one. But if Hoover wasn't told, he would not eat any of the donuts. As a matter of fact, one time, there's a bunch of these ornery farmers in there, and the farmer that had a Hoover, he said, you know what? I've got to go to the post office for about a half an hour. He said, bet you guys can't get Hoover to eat any of those donuts. And he had laid them out on the floor, and he left. As soon as he left, of course, those guys were over there, and they would be saying things like, okay, he's gone now, Hoover, go ahead and eat your donuts. The dog wouldn't touch them. Then they took and they said, okay, you can eat that one, thinking that they would imitate what he said. Hoover wouldn't touch the donuts. Toss one up in the air. Hoover wouldn't eat it. Just kind of looked. So they realized they had to resort to a little bit more direct methods. So they took one and they went over when he wasn't paying attention and just kind of shoved it partway in his mouth. He spit it out and went over in a different spot and laid down. So 2 of these big old farmers in their overalls, they grabbed a hold of him, and the other one, they tried to pry his mouth open, but you know dogs' jaws are pretty tight and they're sharp teeth in there. But the best they could do was they took those big old lips that he had, because they were all floppy, and they managed to open them up, and they kind of shoved one of the donuts into the back, and he kind of whimpered and cried and moved off to the side the best he could. But you know, those big farmers tried to hold him in place, and he finally got away. When the other farmer got back, he looked around, and covering the place were little crumbs of these donuts all over the place. They were just, looked like they were disintegrated, like there was a bomb had gone off and just kind of blasted all the donuts away and everything else was still in place. And over each one of these farmers was covered all this powdered sugar and stuff. And he looked and he said, looks like you guys have been trying to get Hoover to eat those donuts. And the one guy said, he ate them. And the other one that was a little more honest, he said, well, he said, we managed to lift up his lips and shove it into the back of his mouth. He said, but, he said, I was watching his Adam's apple and he never swallowed. So the farmer said, Hoover, go ahead and clean up all the donuts you want. And just like a vacuum cleaner, there he was, and he cleaned up everything on the floor. Then he started trying to lick it off of all the farmers because it was covering them. And the ones that would let him, he cleaned it off. And I'd like to think that farmer might have gone back and got another package and said, hey, Hoover, you can have these donuts. But when I think about that story, I think about character. Somebody once said that character is doing something, the right thing, even though nobody else is looking. And so I have to think about Hoover. Hoover was that dog, big hound dog. And he had character. Sometimes Hoover has more character than what I have. Because when I think back and I say, you know, I don't always do the right thing, especially when somebody else isn't looking. And I won't ask for a show of hands of how many of you could also say that you don't do the right thing all the time. But I think that if we look at some old hound dog, and we can see that Hoover is one of those examples we can point to of what we should really be like. We should be obedient to when our parents ask us to do things. We should do the right thing when we know better than doing the wrong thing. And that is the lesson or moral we're going to pull from this today. What is character? It's doing the right thing even though no one's there to see, just like old Hoover did. Hope you enjoyed the story for today.